Hey gang, welcome back to another video. Now, as a fan of the theming around Galaxy's Edge, it's always exciting when they introduce something new. In this case, they recently added these storage lockers, and I immediately wanted to recreate the control panels for a storage locker of my own. So in this video, I'm going to show you the entire process, from 3D modeling all the way through paint and installation, as I try to bring a bit of Galaxy's Edge home to my own shop. So let's get to it. I'll start on this model, as I do with most, by importing the photo as a canvas in my 3D modeling software. Then, because I know the diameter of the hardware on this panel, I can right-click on the canvas layer from the browser window and select Calibrate Image to set the scale of the photo. I'm basing this calibration on a 7mm button head screw, since that's what it looks like to me. Once the scale of the image is set, I can get to creating my model, starting with the back panel. For this, I'll select Create Sketch from the Create menu, and then choose Rectangle, 2-point rectangle to draw the beginnings of the panel shape. Next, I'll add a diagonal line to match the downward panel angle from the photo. When my sketch looks good, I'll select it, minus the upper right corner that was created when I added the diagonal line, and then I'll click E on my keyboard or select Extrude from the Create menu, and we'll extrude the shape, setting the height to 3/4 of an inch. With the basic shape created, I can get into refining it a bit more by rounding the corners. I'll select all of the corners that I want to round over, and from the Modify menu, I'll select Fillet, and I can then adjust the amount to match the radius in the photo. Next on my to-do list is to create the raised edge of the panel. I'll select the panel shape and use the Shell tool to create the edge thickness based on the reference image. Because the panel spans both doors, I'll need to split the body in two. So I'll select Sketch, choose the ground plane, and then using the Rectangle tool, I'll create a rectangle that is the same width as the space between the two panels, but the height can be taller. Then I'll select the sketch and extrude the rectangle shape through the panel to create the two halves. To create the handle notch, I'll need to sketch a circle and a rectangle. I'll start by clicking on the right side panel and choose Sketch. Then I'll select the 2-point circle tool from the Create menu, and then I can add my first point at the top of the circle, and then my second point at the bottom. To make the rectangle shape, I only need to draw 2 horizontal lines. So I'll choose the Line tool from the Create menu, and from the top center of the circle, I'll draw a straight line to the left panel edge, and then another line from the bottom center of the circle to the left panel edge. This, along with the other sketches, will create the rectangular sketch we need for this notch. I'll select the circle and rectangle sketches, and then click E on my keyboard to extrude the sketch through the body, which will remove that shape from our panel. With the panel out of the way, I can move on to the knobs and buttons. To create the knobs and buttons, I'll use the same sketch command and either the circle or rectangle option to create the additional button shapes, making sure to select New Body from the Extrude pop-up menu on the right side of the screen. This prevents it from being merged into the rest of your model. If I need to repeat a shape, like this square tile, I'll create the sketch, then select it, and press Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V on my keyboard to copy and paste the sketch. Then I can drag it into position and extrude it to create the buttons. In places where there are rows of the same body, I'll select the body, and then from the Create menu, select Pattern, Rectangular Pattern. Then I can select an axis to reference the pattern against, and drag the copy to align it with my reference photo. This step will create duplicates of my model that are equidistant from one another. It defaults to 3 copies, but you can adjust it to suit your needs. Because there's 2 rows of these square tiles, I'll select the first 3 from the browser, and then right-click on any of those highlighted layers and choose the Move Copy option, making sure to also select Create Copy from the pop-up menu in the upper right corner of your screen. Then I can drag my copies to create the second row of tiles. I'll repeat these steps for all of the other shapes until I've got them all in place. The last bit of modeling are these knobs. They have a flat base, a step up, and a peak. Once again, I'll be using the sketch, circle, and extrude tools. The peak of this knob has a transition from a horizontal to a vertical plane. I can create this transition by selecting the intersecting lines between the step up and the peak, and then using the fillet tool to create the rounded transition. It also looks like the peak of these knobs has a beveled edge, so I'll select the top edges of the model, then choose Modify, Chamfer. The last thing I'll do is to add some 3mm holes for the M3 button head screws. Once again, I'll be using the sketch, circle, and the copy-paste functions to place them around the perimeter of the panel, and then select each sketch and extrude the shape through the face of the panel. This will make adding actual screws much easier. The only thing left to do now is to make one. I exported and 3D printed my model and then hit it all with a coat of filler primer to help hide any layer lines. Once everything had sufficient time to dry, I could move on to color, starting with all the knobs and buttons. With all my paint dry and everything in place, I can start aging this piece. I'll be using black and burnt umber oil paint to grunge everything up, and then I'll wipe it away with a rag. I'm looking to create a variety of tone in the finish, and will use this layer to hide any of the still visible layer lines, since I didn't bother to prep this piece before painting. The first pass with the oil paints, I just want to get it everywhere. I'll wipe a lot of this away as I go, so it doesn't matter what this looks like. As I start to remove more of the paint, I'll try and consider what areas might see the most wear and tear from use, and then use that to determine where the weathering should be the heaviest, and where it should be almost none. I'll keep working the paint around, blending it with the brush, wiping it away with the rag, and blending some more until it feels right. And then I'll switch over to some pewter rub and buff to add a bit more metallic highlight. Because rub and buff is a pigmented wax, it can be applied in the same way as the oil paints. So I'll start dabbing it around the panel, making sure not to get any on the knobs and buttons, and we'll continue to work it around the surface until it blends with the previous weathering layer. These small brushes are great for this kind of project because they're somewhere between a chip brush and a makeup brush, so the fine bristles don't leave much of a texture in the paint, but they can also be thrown away once you've gotten a few uses out of them. When everything looks good, I can set it aside to dry for a bit, and then seal in my finish with a satin clear coat. The last thing to do is to add in the M3 button head screws, and then I can get to installing it on my paint cabinet. Because this cabinet is metal and I don't really want to drill into the doors, I'm going to use a bit of very high bond double-sided tape. This should be a perfect, non-destructive application for this panel should it ever need to be replaced. Once I have my strips of tape applied and the cabinet doors wiped down with a tack cloth, I can stick it in place, and then this project is done. Now, while this doesn't have all of the hallmarks of the Galaxy's Edge version, I think this is a good start and leaves me plenty of room for future projects. Well, that's going to do it for this one. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, but most importantly, go make something.